everyone, Joe from GBE Reviews. Today I'm going to cover the visual novel 11 Eyes, or Sin, Damnation, and the Atonement Girl in English. This visual novel was made in 2008 by Studio Lass, but wasn't translated into English until late 2016. Okay, so first, let me give you some background. The reason most people have heard of 11 Eyes is because the visual novel had a god-awful anime adaptation. Though there were some glimmers into the world and just how fascinating the source material was, the anime was a hot garbage mess and handled everything so poorly. Ugh, it's giving me a headache just thinking about it. To give you an extremely quick summary of the 11 Eyes universe, the main character's name is Kakeru. He is listless and uninvolved with anyone besides his only friend Yuka, as he was an orphan and saw his sister kill herself when they were young, and he never quite recovered from that. So mild-mannered cafe worker and emo kid by day, Kakeru is also involved in an occurrence called the Red Night, which basically involves the world turning red and being filled with monsters, and all the people disappear and there's only a couple of people who are actually teleported to this world. Over time, Kakeru will uncover the mysteries of this world, the other people who join him, and all the other various mysteries of the universe. Alright, so let's talk good. The world of 11 Eyes is so fascinating. It's split into roughly thirds. The first third is Kakeru's normal school life, from being in class to having funny conversations to working at his cafe job with his crazy lolicon manager. This section is the laid-back part. It can be hilarious, ridiculous, and a ton of fun. Then another third is the Red Night, and the horrifying monsters and black knights and other stuff that goes along with that. This is where the horror part of the game comes in, and there's tons of blood and guts and all sorts of fighting. These sections are often intense and unnerving, from scary ambient music to the red and ominous atmosphere. This part always kept me on edge, especially because the Red Night could literally come at any time and the transitions were abrupt. Like literally you'd have a sentence and in the middle of it, boom, Red Night would happen. So definitely a really interesting phenomenon there. And then finally, the last third that involves figuring everything out, meeting all the other people in the Red Night, learning about the universe, and training for the battles up ahead. This is the part where a lot of the tension and character development comes in, and when you learn about the deep and rich lore of the universe. A lot of it is phased in over time, and the fact the epilogue to the story is where you get a good deal of backstory that remains hidden over the other 40 plus hours, you definitely learn more about the universe all the way up through the end. These sections can be a bit dense, but they're paced in such a way as to give you tidbits about the universe and break from the silliness and tension, and they always felt pretty spread apart. Also, the main characters in 11 Eyes are amazing. There are a few comic relief characters I could take or leave, but even they were done extremely well and amplified the silliness. Each of the main characters is fleshed out in a way only a visual novel could do. You learn their histories, their thoughts and fears, their emotions. So much about each of them you truly feel like you know them and they're all a pleasure to meet. Plus they are so diverse and each have their own struggles and suffering, so that you could truly relate to each of them and their interconnectivity throughout the story. In fact, as bubbly as Yukiko is during the school settings, her tragedies and the arc with her and Takahashi are some of the most intense and emotional moments I've ever experienced in a VN, and this is even compared to god-tier VNs like Tsukihime. Another thing I absolutely loved is the cross-vision mechanic. As far as I can tell, this is fairly unique and allows you to experience certain scenes from other characters' eyes. For example, you play as Kakeru, but there's a scene where you talk on the phone to Yuka, and you can experience her side of the call and her internal dialogue with the cross-vision after the fact. It gives you a huge amount of insight into what she's thinking, the emotions behind what she's saying. Plus, it gives you tons of scenes in history of enemies and friends alike, and lets you see what characters were doing while you were off fighting in a different place. The mechanic is fantastic and really puts you into other characters' heads, while not really forcing you into different perspectives like Swan Song or that kind of visual novel. The soundtrack's also amazing. From the opening lunatic eyes to the sad and emotional piano music, it seems like the score is always hitting the right notes at the right time. The last section of the VN is intense and has a lot of twists and turns that make you completely shocked. They did an amazing job of twisting things around and giving you that oh shit type of plot turn that leaves you absolutely speechless. I will add that Kukuri ending brings the story to a full circle in such a way that none of the other girls' endings really did. I strongly suggest that one over any of the other ones if you're only going to play it once. Finally, for those of you learning Japanese, you're going to get exposure to all sorts of words you wouldn't normally hear. From things like ether to phantasmagoria, you'll hear lots of neat phrases you've likely never heard before. Okay, so now to the bad, and trust me, there's definitely some of this. First, a huge thank you to the fan group who translated this, because 11 Eyes was a big part of why I started learning Japanese, and boy was the language in this VN sophisticated. I do have to say though, they kinda did a shit job. The VN is full of typos, bad grammar, and weird translations of phrases, especially with Yukiko, where they say things like, "You know that's not true, silly Willy," when clearly that's not what the Japanese is saying, and they're just kinda adding a localization that I thought was a little strange. It can be a bit frustrating and distracting, though I think they generally got the idea across, and you should always at least get the gist of what they're trying to say. The comedy sections can be a bit over the top and drawn out. There's a bit too much reliance on typical tropes like perverted boys and painfully naive and innocent girls. I also thought the world of 11 Eyes was deep, but a little bit confusing. Maybe some things were lost in translation, but I still have no idea about Lisa Lotte, where all her powers came from, and really what she was all about. Many of those sections describing the world or the Kusakabe school were long-winded and unnecessary. Also, the ending played it a bit safe for my taste, though I was generally happy where it went. Finally, one thing to state as a potential negative is how bloody the VN can get. There is gore and death, and some of the Red Knight sections are a bit much, even for those with thick skin. Finally, the ecchi. There's a few H scenes spread throughout the VN, but they're very few and far between, and one of them is actually optional. You won't get the majority of the H scenes for each round until basically the ending, and at that point you've been playing for so long and the mood is so tense, you're not even really interested. In the Kukuri arc, it is in fact an afterthought that happens after the epilogue. So that's really the only one I watched, and it was just basically a standalone thing that they tacked on at the end just so that it would be there. I mean, it was unnecessary, but it was alright. I mean, it was done well. It's pretty standard compared to other VNs, so if that's your kind of thing, you'll definitely find it at the end. Alright, so let's wrap this up. I really enjoyed 11 Eyes. If you enjoy horror, magic, action, and aren't too bothered by a fairly rough translation, I strongly suggest checking this one out. As always, this is Joe from GBE Reviews saying to you, Jeanne.
Oh, please don't let me